that what the president is trying to do here is all about jobs. Everything comes back, he says, whether it's Harley Davidson or other CEOs with whom he's met in the pharmaceutical industry and a host of industries, union leaders as well. Jobs, jobs, jobs. How is that resonating?
Well, Neil, I'll tell you, anything that this president wants to do to continue the record job growth that we saw under President Obama, 10 to 15 million jobs created during his administration, 72 straight months of private sector job growth, longest in American history. I'm all for that.
But that was a fairly weak recovery, right? And a lot of those were part-time jobs and lower-paying jobs than we've seen before. It's better than we were, you're quite right, but you want to do better than that, right?
Well, you do want to do better than that, and the consistent message we heard from the Obama administration over the course of those 8 years is, here's where we are, but we got to do better. But you got to appreciate in context where we were, Neil, and you know this, 750,000 jobs a month we were losing when President Obama came into office. Took time for his policies to get into place. Once they were in place and locked into the foundation, then we saw job growth take off. We need to do better, and we're going to do better. But let's take a moment very quickly to look at what just happened. We had one of the iconic American companies in our country having to come to Donald Trump, to President Donald Trump at the White House, because this president is sequestered in the White House because they don't want him to come to their company in Wisconsin because of fear of protest. This is a condition that the president has set up himself. You also heard him talking about his win in Wisconsin.
I think you're being a little bit petty there. I know where you're coming from, but he's been meeting with a lot of people coming to the White House, and so if it's, I know what you're saying about he could have gone there, and all. The fact of the matter is that he's been using the White House.
But Neil, we're talking about the protests. Why are the protests happening?
But Angela, what I'm wondering about is what will come of these meetings, regardless of where they are. The president has vowed to keep more Americans getting hired here and not lose their jobs to foreign countries here. How effective will he be at that? It's one thing to talk it up, it's another to deliver the goods, right?
Well, so far he's been extremely effective. If you look at what's happening, I mean, first with Harley Davidson, but also with Amazon and several other very large companies that are choosing to keep jobs in the United States because it's a new day, it's a new administration, and this one has pledged to be very business friendly. Now, what's interesting here is that President Trump might have great job growth, but that's not what will make him a two-term president. What will make this man a two-term president is what we saw at the UC Berkeley campus last night, which was a riot. It was a complete left-wing freakout that the rest of the country is completely turned off by. They called it a violent protest. Well, if it's violent, it's not a protest. At that point, it's a riot. And if you go to standunited.org right now, you can sign a petition to take away federal funding from UC Berkeley. There's a petition like that for sanctuary campuses.
Well, but I mean, that might be going a little far here. But I do see, and Cora, I want to get your thoughts on those protests, 70-some-odd congressmen not going to an inauguration, a lot of people not even opting to sit in on cabinet confirmation hearings. Don't you think a lot of this is getting childish? And then if Republicans had done the same, and I know there's concern about the way they treated Barack Obama's Supreme Court pick, but if all Republicans had done the same, skipping out on confirmation hearings just to make a point, that you'd be furious.
Well, Neil, let's go back to the top of the conversation where we began. This is a position, this is an area where the president did this to himself. You heard him just there in that conversation with Harley Davidson. He is still talking about the campaign, and the combative tone of the campaign has carried into the White House. He's making more enemies than friends, and that's a bipartisan notion.
But it's one thing to say that kind of stuff, and another thing, what we saw at a lot of these protests where they're lighting fires, in the case of Berkeley, where it gets pretty violent. I mean, there's a difference, right?
There is a difference, but
you have to be offended by that.
This is the national. This is a representation of the national concern about what President Trump has done thus far, right? How he's conducted himself.
I like to think this is more the exception than the rule, but I think a few people who don't like the election, for whatever reason, I know maybe it's the popular vote thing versus the electoral vote. This is ridiculous. I think even you would agree that's overstated.
We can't sweep those things to the side. These folks are executing their First Amendment right to free speech. And they have a right to speak out against this president.
This isn't just free speech. Angela, I'm wondering what signal you're worried this is sending.
Sure. Well, the signal is that when this section of the left wing doesn't get what they want, they get violent. And if you're on a college campus and you are so threatened, or you feel so threatened by an opposing viewpoint that you start launching fireworks at a library, you do not belong on a college campus. That should be a free marketplace of thought. And that message that we're seeing sent by these riots is not concern. Concern is thinking, oh, you know, maybe we ought to do something about that. I've never been so concerned that I light something on fire.
Into the Trump administration, and we have had record numbers of protests against this president because people are offended by the positions and the policies and the people he's attempted to appoint.
Wouldn't you want to save it until he's done stuff to get you ticked off, right?
I'm sorry, Neil, I couldn't hear you. What was that again?
He hasn't even done anything yet, and you're already going nuts.
No, that's clearly not fair. I mean, the man has signed record numbers of executive orders since he's been in office, to be sure. And I understand that that's a notion to carry over from the campaign
that way to Barack Obama signing executive orders?
Say again, I'm sorry.
What if conservatives acted up and had these kind of protests, these kind of responses, skipped out on meetings and events in response to Barack Obama signing so many executive orders?
But, Neil, we had this level of obstruction in the previous administration.
We had nothing like this, my friend. I think you would have to admit we had nothing. We had nothing like this.
If we can
Show
quickly
me a
take
Tea
up...
Party
No,
riot.
we didn't have
You can't.
this.
There isn't one.
Unprecedented record numbers of protests against this president. We're less than 2 weeks into his administration.
Let's take up. Can we take up Merrick Garland? I saw one couple dressed up as Martha and Washington and George Washington, and outside
Merrick Garland
bad
didn't
wigs,
even get a hearing, Neil. Merrick Garland didn't even get a hearing. He prosecuted the Oklahoma City bombing case.
He
couldn't even get a hearing.
All right, that's the tit for tat. I see where this is going. All right, guys, thank you both very, very much.